June 28, 1942. Somewhere near Morozovskaya, southern Russia, German Lieutenant Klaus Hoffmann sat outside his tent, drinking coffee. The night was clear. Stars filled the sky. He'd been on the Eastern Front for 8 months now. He was tired but confident. The Soviets were retreating. Their planes were old. Their pilots barely trained. He lit a cigarette. His men were sleeping. Finally, some rest. Then he heard it. A soft whooshing sound, like wind through trees. He looked up. Nothing. The sound came closer. Louder now. Not an engine. Something else. Something is wrong. Hoffmann wasn't worried. Not yet. He'd seen plenty of Soviet planes. Most were easy kills. The Germans controlled the skies. Their Messerschmitts were fast. Their pilots were skilled. They'd shot down hundreds of Soviet aircraft in the first weeks of the war. The Red Air Force was a joke. Everyone knew it. Even Soviet night bombers were no threat. They flew old crop dusters, slow, wooden biplanes from the 1920s. Hoffmann and his fellow officers laughed about them. They called them flying coffins, sewing machines. Nothing to fear. The whooshing got louder. Then he saw them, dark shapes against the stars. 3 planes, low, very low, no engine noise, just that strange sound. Hoffmann jumped up. He yelled. His men scrambled from their tents. Too late. The first bomb hit 30 meters away. The ground shook. Fire erupted. The second bomb landed right in the middle of camp. Hoffmann dove behind a truck, screaming. Flames. Chaos. When he looked up, the planes were gone. Silent as ghosts. 20 seconds. That's all it took. What Hoffmann didn't know would terrify him even more. Those pilots weren't men. They were women. Teenagers. Most of them. Flying planes made of wooden fabric with no parachutes. No radios. No armor. Over the next 3 years, they'd fly more than 30,000 missions. They'd drop over 3,000 tons of bombs. They'd become the most feared unit on the Eastern Front. The Germans called them the Night Witches. This is their story. Germany invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941. 3 million German soldiers poured across the border. The Soviets were caught completely off guard. In the first weeks, they lost thousands of planes. Entire air regiments were destroyed on the ground. The Germans thought victory would come in months, maybe weeks. Soviet pilots were dying by the hundreds. The country needed everyone who could fight. Every man, every woman, everyone. Marina Raskova knew this. She was already famous. People called her the Soviet Amelia Earhart. She'd set long-distance flight records. She was the first woman navigator in the Soviet Air Force. When the war started, letters poured into her office. Hundreds of them, all from women. Young women who knew how to fly. Women who wanted to fight. But the military said no. Women could be nurses. They could work in factories. They couldn't be combat pilots. That was impossible. Raskova didn't accept that. She went straight to Stalin. She brought the letters with her. Hundreds of them. She made her case. The Soviet Union was losing. Badly. They needed every pilot they could get. Stalin listened. He agreed. On October 8, 1941, he issued Order 0099. 3 all-female air regiments would be formed. Pilots, navigators, mechanics, ground crews, all women. It had never been done before. Not anywhere in the world. Not by any country. The 586th would fly fighter planes. The 587th would fly heavy bombers. And the 588th would fly night bombers. The women who scored worst in training would go to the 588th. Nobody wanted that assignment. The 588th got the planes nobody else would touch. Polikarpov Po-2 biplanes. Designed in 1928. Made of plywood and canvas stretched over a wooden frame. Originally built to train student pilots and dust crops. Not built for combat. Not even close. The plane had an open cockpit. No armor. No guns except a single rifle the navigator held in her lap. The plane could only carry about 770 pounds of bombs. 6 small bombs total. 3 under each wing. The maximum speed was 94 miles per hour. That's slower than cars on a highway. German fighter planes flew over 300 miles per hour. Their stall speed was faster than the Po-2's top speed. Here's what that meant. If a German fighter tried to shoot down a Po-2, The German plane would drop out of the sky before it could slow down enough to aim. The Po-2's slowness actually protected it, sort of, but everything else was against them. The planes were freezing. The open cockpit meant temperatures of 40 below zero. The women wore whatever they could find. Men's uniforms. Boots are too big. They tore up maps and stuffed them in their boots for warmth. They used navigation pencils as eyeliner. They cut their hair short so it wouldn't freeze to the cockpit walls. The cold was so intense that touching any metal would rip the skin right off their hands. And they flew without parachutes. Not because they were brave, because the planes couldn't carry the weight. Between the pilot, navigator, and bombs, there was no room for parachutes. Not until 1944. Anyway, for 3 years, if your plane got hit, you went down with it. No escape, no second chance. You just died. The women knew this. They flew anyway. June 1942, the 588th arrived at the front lines. They were assigned to the 4th Air Army in southern Russia. Their first mission came that very night. 20 planes took off in the darkness. Their target was German headquarters near Morozovskaya. The women were terrified. Most had never been in combat. Many were 19 or 20 years old. Some were younger. They trained for months. But this was real. This was war. They developed a tactic, a brilliant, terrifying tactic. They'd fly in groups of 3. The first plane would fly straight at the target. German searchlights would lock onto it. Anti-aircraft guns would fire. That plane would circle, drawing all the attention. The second plane would do the same thing from another direction. More chaos, more lights, more guns. Then the third plane would cut its engine completely off. It would glide in, silent except for that whooshing sound. The wind through the wood and canvas. The Germans said it sounded like witches on broomsticks. The plane would drop its bombs and glide away. Then they'd switch positions and do it again. All night long. Each mission lasted about 30 to 50 minutes round trip. But they didn't fly just once per night. They flew 8 times, 10 times, sometimes 15 times in a single night. 2 pilots once flew 18 missions before dawn. Think about that. Take off, fly to the target, get shot at, drop your bombs, fly back, land, load more bombs, do it again, and again, and again, for hours, every night, for years. The women spent up to 10 hours in the air every single night. They were exhausted, freezing, terrified, but they kept flying. The German soldiers couldn't understand it. They'd hear that sound, that whooshing, then bombs would drop from nowhere. They couldn't see the planes. The Po-2s were too small for radar, too quiet to hear until it was too late. The attacks came every few minutes, all night, no sleep, no rest, just constant fear. One German soldier wrote in his diary that the sound was the worst part. You'd hear it coming. You knew bombs were about to fall, but you couldn't see anything. You just had to wait and hope you wouldn't die. When the Germans finally shot down one of these planes and reached the wreckage, they pulled off the pilot's helmet. Long hair fell out. It was a woman. The German soldiers were shocked. In Germany, women didn't fight. They stayed home. They raised children. The idea of women flying combat missions was unthinkable. It was terrifying. The Germans decided these couldn't be normal women. They had to be criminals, or they'd been given special drugs to see in the dark. They spread rumors. The Soviets were using witches, real witches with supernatural powers. The German High Command took them seriously, very seriously. They issued a standing order. Any German pilot who shot down a night witch would automatically receive the Iron Cross. That was one of Germany's highest military honors. You didn't get an Iron Cross for shooting down a regular Soviet plane. You got it for shooting down a night witch. That tells you how much the Germans feared them. But shooting them down was nearly impossible. The planes flew too low. They came in under the radar. They'd glide in at treetop level, silent. The only warning was that whooshing sound. By the time you heard it, bombs were already falling. And if a German fighter did get close, the Po-2 could turn on a dime. It could make tight circles that would stall any German fighter. One German ace named Joseph Kosiok managed to shoot down 3 or 4 night witches in a single night. July 31st, 1943. The entire regiment was grounded the next night. That's how rare it was for anyone to shoot them down. The numbers the night witches achieved are stunning. Over 4 years, They flew 23,000 to 30,000 sorties. That's missions, not individual flights. They dropped over 3,000 tons of bombs. They destroyed or damaged 17 river crossings, 9 railways, 2 railway stations, 26 warehouses, 12 fuel depots, hundreds of vehicles, thousands of German soldiers. They flew in support of every major Soviet campaign on the Southern Front, Stalingrad, the Caucasus, Crimea, Belarus, the liberation of Poland. They were there for all of it, flying every single night. 32 of them died. That's remarkably few considering how dangerous the missions were. But each death hit hard. These women flew together every night. They knew each other like sisters. Nadelda Popova once said the worst part wasn't the danger. It was losing friends. She'd fly 18 missions in one night, land at dawn, and find out 3 of her friends hadn't come back. Then she'd have to fly again the next night, and the next, and the next. The male Soviet pilots didn't respect them at first. They mocked them, called them little girls playing war, said they'd get everyone killed. The women ignored it. They kept flying. After a few months, the mockery stopped. The male pilots saw what they were doing, flying mission after mission, taking damage, watching friends die, never quitting, never complaining. The men started to respect them, then admire them, then fear disappointing them. In February 1943, the Soviet High Command gave them a new designation, the 46th Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. The Guards title was a huge honor. It meant you were elite, the best of the best. In October 1943, they added another title, the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. Taman referred to their role in liberating the Taman Peninsula. They'd helped win major victories there. They'd earned the recognition. By the end of the war, 23 of the Night Witches had been named Hero of the Soviet Union. That was the highest honor the country could give. Most surviving pilots had flown over 800 missions each. Some flew over 1,000. Think about that. 1,000 combat missions. 1,000 times taking off into darkness, flying into anti-aircraft fire, dropping bombs, and somehow making it home. 1,000 times. Their last mission was May 4, 1945. They flew within 37 miles of Berlin. The war was almost over. Germany was about to surrender. The Night Witches had been there from the beginning. Now they were there at the end. They'd flown through the entire war. Never stopped. Never quit. They'd done what everyone said was impossible. When the war ended, the Soviet Union threw a huge victory parade in Moscow. Every major unit marched through Red Square. Tanks, artillery, infantry, fighter planes flew overhead. But the Night Witches weren't invited. Their planes were too slow. They were told it would hold up the parade. After flying 30,000 missions, after earning the Guards title, after 23 of them becoming heroes of the Soviet Union, they weren't allowed to march. 6 months later, the regiment was disbanded. The women went home. Many tried to continue flying. They were told no. Flying was for men now. The war was over. For decades, their story was mostly forgotten. A few books in Russia mentioned them, but in the West, almost nobody knew about them. It wasn't until the 2000s that historians really started telling their story. People couldn't believe it. An all-female combat unit that flew 30,000 missions? In wooden planes with no parachutes? It sounded made up, but it wasn't. It was real, every bit of it. Klaus Hoffmann, that German officer who heard the whooshing sound that first night in June 1942, survived the war. Years later, he was interviewed. He said he could never forget that sound. He'd hear it in his sleep, that soft whooshing, then silence, then explosions. He said it was the worst psychological weapon he ever faced, not because it killed so many Germans, though it did, but because it never stopped. Every single night for 3 years, you could never rest, you could never feel safe. The Night Witches were always there, always watching, always attacking, and they were women. That's what really terrified them. The women of the 588th flew more combat missions than any bomber crews in history, more than American B-17 crews, more than British Lancaster crews, and they did it in planes that could barely fly. They did it without armor, without radios, without parachutes. They did it when male pilots said it couldn't be done. They did it when the Germans said it was impossible. They just kept flying. By the end of the war, the Soviet military had learned something important. It wasn't about strength. It wasn't about being tough. It was about courage, about commitment, about refusing to quit. The Night Witches had all of that. In December 1944, they finally got parachutes. The planes were slightly modified to carry the extra weight. But by then, most of the women didn't want them. They'd flown without them for 3 years. They'd survived. Why change now? Some of them refused to use the parachutes. They said it was bad luck. One last number puts it all in perspective. Over 30,000 missions. That's more sorties than all American bomber crews flew over Germany in 1943. And the Night Witches did it in planes that were built to dust crops. They did it as teenagers. They did it when everyone said women couldn't be combat pilots. They proved everyone wrong. They flew more. They fought harder. They never quit. That's why the Germans feared them. That's why history remembers them. Thanks for watching. Next week, we're going to talk about another group the Germans underestimated. Soviet female snipers. They killed over 11,000 German soldiers. The Germans thought they were ghosts. They weren't. They were real. And they were everywhere. If you want to hear that story, hit subscribe. I'll see you next time.